All right, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and start the meeting. I want to officially call the order of the November 1, 2019 Iowa Medical Cannabidiol Advisory Board meeting at 10:02 a.m. I'm going to call roll. So when I announce your name, indicate that you're here. Dr. Cheney.
Here.
Dr. Leespo.
Here.
Dr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Richards.
Here.
Dr. Stoken.
Here.
For purpose of the record, I'll call Dr. Schreck's name, but he has indicated that he would be absent today for today's meeting. Dr. Schreck. Item 3, the approval of minutes. It is now time to approve minutes from the August 2nd, 2019 Iowa Medical Cannabidiol Advisory Board meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review these minutes, and are there any questions or edits to the minutes?
I move for approval of the August 2nd minutes as submitted.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the public comment section. Has everyone signed in on the public comment sheet who wishes to speak? Okay. We've set aside this time to allow any members of the public who would like to address the board. All speakers are asked to keep their comments to 3 minutes. If you've not already done so, please sign the sheet, and then please approach the podium up here to the front when your name is called. First on the list, we have David Barnett.
I'm Dave Barnett. I am a patient in Iowa's medical cannabidiol program. I'm a father who cannabis has given me the mobility and lack of pain that I can now spend more time active with my kids. I'm also a 100% disabled veteran with multiple sclerosis. First, I'd like to say I support adding PTSD as a condition, approved condition here in Iowa, and that I also support the adding of dried flower and for vaporization as a form of consumption. Now I'd like to talk about compassion. Members of the board, in the past, you have made comments that because of the restrictions to research on cannabis at this time, that you need to think of this as a compassionate use program, and that needs to come into your decisions also, along with the science that is available. But I haven't seen that these last few meetings. Being compassionate would be allowing patients to have the amount of medicine that they need, not extremely low restrictions being recommended. Being sympathetic to the patients and what they tell you, what they need. Showing compassion would be already approving some of these conditions that are going to be discussed today, because the science is there on top of all the stories patients has helped in the past and in other states where it's legal already. And keeping this short and to the point, I just like to urge you to keep that in mind today when discussing these conditions for approval and your recommendations to the state legislature and the governor.
Thank you. John Forbes, you're next.
Thank you for allowing me to address the board again today. Looking at your recommendations that you're putting forward, the only concern I have is the 4.5 grams per 90 days. the legislature passed this past session in our bill, 25 grams per 90 days. We sat down and negotiated that. We talked it out in the House. I sat with both members of the Republican and Democratic Party, and we, through the information we had, and I worked with Senator Tom Green, who is a pharmacist in the Senate, and looking at what other states' programs are, we came up with a 25 gram per 90-day limit. Right now, with the 3%, we have no limit on what a person can purchase here in the state of Iowa. I was in the medical cannabis dispensary in Windsor Heights about a month ago and talking with them, and you know, a person could come in and buy 1,000 capsules right now of CBD, THC, and they legally could sell that to them. Now, they probably wouldn't do that, but there's no limit right now. And we thought putting that gram limit on would be the best way to be able to allow patients access to the medication. An example I have is I have a patient in my pharmacy who's on OxyContin, 80 milligrams, 2 tablets, 4 times a day. That's 640 milligrams of OxyContin. This patient would like to be able to access the medical cannabis program and maybe reduce that OxyContin load. But the problem is the cost. For him to be able, again, he'd probably have to take way over, to at least starting out, way over this 50, your proposal would be 50 milligrams per day. And many patients here in the state of Iowa that are on chronic pain medical cannabis take more than 50 milligrams. And I've been told that, you know, they've got some patients way over 200. So if we pass, if you recommend a 4.5 gram amount, we're going to have patients here in the state of Iowa that will probably drop out of the program. Because if you're being maintained on a dose, say, of 100 milligrams per day, and most of your physicians here, and you tell your patient, I'm going to have to reduce your blood pressure medication by 50% because some board made that recommendation, that doesn't go over very well. So I hope you will look at that milligram per day limit and go with what the legislature passed through the House and the Senate by overwhelming numbers. I think it was 136 to 10 or something like that. But that's my biggest concern, is having patients have access to the medication they need at the dose they need. Thank you.
Okay, next up, is it Connie Brodus?
Brooks.
Brooks?
Hi, my name's Connie Brooks and I'm a mom. My intellectually disabled, aggressive daughter is 27 years old. She was thrown out of a host home placement because of her violent behavior. I was informed that they would drop her off at a homeless shelter if I didn't take her home. She made it 3 weeks at my house until I had to call the police and have her taken to Lutheran Hospital, hoping for help with an admission from their psych ward to Woodward Academy, the state's ICFID facility that she medically qualifies for but is nearly impossible to get into. Lutheran Hospital said it was a long-term care issue, not an acute care issue, and not their problem. The only advice they offered was I had a right to defend myself. We had a number of physical altercations, but they were dangerous to both of us. I realized I had to get away before the first punch, but that only made it worse. Once she realized she had power over me, because violence is about power, I'm learning. As I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom for protection, the data was incontrovertibly showing her violence was escalating. She would bang on the door until it bowed, while I prayed it wouldn't give way. And then she crossed the line and hit me while I was driving home. I could no longer take her to my office for her bus to Dayhab, but the door-to-door service from my house meant I couldn't get to my job until 8:45, and I'd have to be home by 2:45. The only way to get 40 hours of work time was if I could work remotely, a request the Iowa Department of Education denied. I was forced to leave my government career of 18 years. I lost my $86,000 a year income, my family health insurance for my 3 children, and 8% of my pension in perpetuity. In desperation, I worked with a psychiatrist to try different medications, and we tried many. I learned of clinical trial for an old drug that had shown promise with ID people with aggression, but the local psychiatrist fought me because it carried a black box warning, which I was not familiar with. He told me of side effects called tardive dyskinesia, which were tremors that once manifested were irreversible. He didn't want to prescribe it, but I was desperate. When I went to fill the prescription, the pharmacist, thank God, explained tardive dyskinesia includes tongue thrusting. I had no idea that the involuntary action I had always attributed to Down syndrome was actually a side effect of a medication. It has been a traumatic experience for both of us. I believe medical ethics to do no harm would require approving access to promising substances, especially if they are less dangerous than the ones currently in use. If you have concerns, then include a data monitoring requirement to prove effectiveness. Thank you for this opportunity to tell my story and begin my healing from domestic violence. As an aside, I was very grateful to find the program at the University of Iowa through a referral from our PCP. And while I know it isn't your purview, I would like to just inspire a vision for combining the state's medical resources for this population with the Woodward Residential Facility to create a state-of-the-art research, stabilization, and training program, perhaps at the Vinton campus for better proximity. I'm sure that there are other families like mine that desperately need research-based help. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Jen Simmering?
Some paper now.
There you go.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Jen Simmering. I'm from Systems Unlimited, and this is Julie Knox. She is the mom of someone we provide services to. We are one of the largest home and community-based service providers in eastern Iowa. We serve people in Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, and a lot of small communities surrounding that area. And we provide service to over 400 people who have brain injuries, intellectual disabilities, autism, or mental health support needs. We're here today to thank you so much for the work you've done so far to make potentially life-changing medication available to people we provide services to. We know that's been hard, and we really appreciate your work on that. Currently, about 20% of the people that we serve in 24-hour services in like a group home that you were talking about, those people have autism, and more than half of those people we figure would be potentially eligible for registration for CBD medications due to self-injurious or aggressive behavior. We also know that there's a condition being presented today that would add the diagnosis of intellectual disability with self-injurious behavior or aggression to the list of qualifying conditions. And the success of that petition would make about 126 additional people we serve in 24-hour group homes potentially eligible to use that medication. So the problem that we're facing about this is that our services, the services we provide rely pretty heavily on Medicaid funding. So much of our budget comes from federal dollars, which makes us very nervous about what might happen to our federal funding if we pass medication that is legal in Iowa but is not legal federally. We can't take the risk of losing our funding by passing this medication, but we exist to support people with disabilities to make their own decisions about how to take care of themselves. Julie's son is a particular case right now, who is somebody who has the registration card, he's got everything ready to go, and he lives in a home where our staff provides his medication, and I can't instruct the staff to pass it because I'm worried that the federal government might decide to make an issue of the funding. So that's one part of our trouble. And even when the issue of federal legality is resolved, we're still going to face some barriers to making that medication available safely to the folks we provide services to around the registration process for caregivers. Right now, we would have to register each of our staff separately for each person that they might potentially pass medication to. And when I figure the numbers based on the number of staff that we usually have and the amount of turnover that we'll often have and the number of people that we think would be potentially eligible to use this medication, we're looking at needing to have about 500 registration cards that we have to manage all the time. That would be a pretty difficult thing for us to do. So, that said, we've got some solutions that we think would start to help the problem. We would be happy to provide any input as an agency that we could to support any effort to get a waiver from the federal drug schedule so that these medications aren't, yeah, that the understand. Great. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask you just a quick follow-up question. Are your recommendations on this document that you passed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Courtney Wright.
Hello, thank you for having me today. My name is Courtney Wright. I am a recent business owner of C. Rice Holistic Services with Purpose, but I've also dealt with the condition of PTSD after a work situation with children where I was hurt and then I wasn't treated for many of my injuries. During that time, I was able to, and even after, I was able to go to therapy where I did NET therapy, as well as using CBD oil and even the CBD dry flower. However, many people are not in the same boat that I was in terms of being able to have the money that it costs to go see a doctor that does NET treatment when you don't want to take heavy medications that have heavy side effects. I was spending on the upwards of $200 per visit. In addition, I've been able to go to places like the House of Glass to buy CBD flowers, where you get 3.5 grams for $48. When you suffer from PTSD along with pain, spending $48 each time is very, very expensive. And my problem with it is that people end up going not only to these places and also having to get medication for their mental illness like PTSD, but now because those things aren't really working for them, they also are going to the streets to get their marijuana instead of being able to go to a place that is reliable, a place that is safe. And I think that's one of the bigger issues. Now we have people who, instead of being sufferers or overcomers of PTSD, they are now being criminalized. And in this community, in Iowa specifically, in Des Moines, Polk County, African Americans are being pulled over at a rate of 4.1%, 4.1 times the rate of other people for drug crimes, including marijuana. So I think there are a lot of people that are being thrown in the boat they really don't belong in order to receive services that we could receive from our government as the citizens of Iowa. And so I just ask that you guys, have compassion and look at the things that would be a little more helpful to not just African Americans, but everyone in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally Gear?
Good morning. I just have a brief request that you consider adding a patient to the board, recommending that to the legislature, as well as a caregiver of a patient. So you have the perspective from those that are using the products.
Peter Komendowski?
Thank you. In my opinion, you're not just some board. You're some of the most effective and important professionals in Iowa. People charged with the responsibility to protect Iowans from unintended consequences. And so I apologize as an Iowan for any reference to you as anything but the people with the most highest level of esteem and professionalism in handling this matter. On that note, I also think that the board should be populated by professionals, not patients, not parents. There are other forums where they can voice their opinions. We've seen some issues about dosage. I've looked at your recommendations for 2019, and under the circumstances, even though I'd rather not see THC in the mix of a CBD program, I think they're a good sound bunch of recommendations. So I commend you on that. I commend you on the 4.5 grams because it's a limitation that seems to be reasonable, and it's important that we just maintain a 90-day and a daily dosage limit based on that 90-day limit so that we can effectively manage and monitor what the outcomes are with some of these experiments that we're performing in Iowa. So that's a big deal because we're sitting in a situation now where we have this whole crisis with vaping. The problem's coming of age quickly because we now know there really is no scientific data that says you could take hot oil or petroleum products or anything else injected in human beings' lungs and have good things happen. So we really misconstrued the potential of delivering even a potential medicine and created a very harmful delivery system that only emulates smoking cigarettes. and we have huge problems associated with that. We're learning quickly, these are unintended consequences when we have a rush to market. You know, the relentless pressure of the marijuana industry on this advisory committee, swamping them with scientifically flawed studies in support of changes obviously fueled by the desire for profit, can threaten the health, welfare, and safety of Iowans. Iowans innocent to the potential risk and consequences depend on this advisory board and the collaborative efforts of the Iowa Board of Medicine to protect them. You are essentially the last line of defense from what has been a concerted effort of misinformation and outright deceptive practices. It's not the intentions we question to help people. It's the route which people are trying to take. These efforts now exacerbate due process by bringing back some of the same requests over and over again, and you gotta wonder when this madness is gonna end. There appears to be no end in sight for an industry that refuses to take no for an answer, even in the face of scientific evidence that the risk of consequences exceeds the benefits of many of their claims, and in fact may harm more people than they help. Science, not emotional shouts, have to be in the forefront. Due diligence, not a rush to market, needs to prevail. And above all, when it comes to our veterans and PTSD, our children and all Iowans suffering from maladies that the marijuana industry markets thinly veiled promises to cure, we need to progress slowly to ensure that we can maximize the benefits and minimize the risks with good science and a measured, disciplined approach. For that effort, we thank this committee in advance, and may God help us if somehow your efforts are undermined. Thank you.
Next up, is it Kanika Aurora?
Kanika will be speaking for the physician survey results that we did, so she is not going to use her public comment.
Okay, all right. Aaron Bowman.
Hi, I'm Erin. My little boy has a rare disease called UBE2A deficiency syndrome. It's given him autism, epilepsy, intellectual disability with outward aggression and self-harming. I testified here last year in favor of THC because it greatly reduced his behaviors at school. And today I'm giving you data from my son's school, a letter from his teacher showing that the medicine has helped him decrease his self-harming and aggression by 50%. And also a letter from the school on why he's unable to get his medicine at school on school property. Currently, I have to take him out of school and remove him 1,000 feet from the school property to give him his medicine. So I really appreciate you guys giving that recommendation to the legislature to fix that. But I kind of wanted to give a background on my son's self-harming so you understand what big deal it is, that it's been improved 50%. He started seizing before his first birthday, and by the time he was just 2 years old, his body was completely devastated by pharmaceuticals and anti-epileptics. In 2015, when he was just 3, we started using a CBD to treat his epilepsy, and today my son is 1,588 days seizure-free. Unfortunately, he still struggles greatly with self-harm and aggression, and as an infant on all fours, he would bash his head into his crib. He would cause huge lumps on his face and bleeding sores. By 18 months, he headbutted me so bad he sent me to the hospital with a cervical disc fracture in my neck. And in preschool, he started giving himself lumps so bad on his forehead with terrible bruising. And his teachers in school were afraid that he would really hurt himself when he slammed his face into the desk, the floor, or the wall. In kindergarten, the trend continued, so that's when I started adding in the THC and came to testify to you guys that it positively affected my son's behavior and enabled him to participate in school. But last May, I realized the oil only has a 4-hour half-life, which is when I started giving him the noon dose. And due to his self-harming, the school does track his behavior every 5 minutes. So they use that on a scale of 0 to 3. So a 0 would be no self-harming, a 1 would be him hitting himself on a soft object, and a 2 would be a self-injury against a wall or cabinet, and a 3 would be any injury type resulting in a mark on his body. After his noon dose of last year, his special education teacher observed an improvement in the severity of his self-injury, which again is 50%, you can see on the graphs I gave you. And they also noticed an increase in his communication, an improvement in his gross motor skills, and initiating play with his peers on the playground. I've given you the observations and the data so you can see it for yourself, but I just want to say that this giving him 3 days of CBD, 3 days, I can't even talk, 3 doses of CBD a day has given him freedom from seizures, but it's also enabled him to be a little boy. Instead of his peers being terrified of him at school, of them hitting him, they're now giving him high fives, waiting for him in the hall. They fight over who's going to sit with him at lunch. As a parent, to see your kid having children be afraid of him to wanting to be his friend is incredible. Thanks for doing what you guys do.
Is he on the program?
He is.
Okay.
He's been on the program since 2015.
The program here now?
Mm-hmm, correct. He originally qualified for epilepsy.
Kim Phillips?
Hello. My name's Kim Phillips, and according to this letter and testimonies of a lot of people that can validate, I'm considered 100% totally and permanently disabled, solely to the service-connected PTSD. Due to time constraints, I'm not able to speak about myself and why I'm still here and in business casual. You can't see what hypervigilance does in my head. I'm going to talk a little bit about my friend Sonia Kenrick. She had a similar diagnosis and is one of the lost to 22 a day. Statistic last March of 2019. The Iowa legislature in 2019 posted a March 30th video of her a week later acknowledging the gifts that she had to bring to the community and community service with building farms around Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to feed the people who were food insecure. And it also talked about why she was lost to post-traumatic stress disorder. And then if you look in the Women's Day of May 2018, you'll see an article featured on her, and it will explicitly share what her goals were to have 500 acres and then eventually feed all of Cedar Rapids, and I was helping her build a school online. We were en route to our 4th meeting until I found out that she died 2 hours before a storytelling event. And that was our last communication. So I thought I'd use her as an example because I'm here and she's not. And the Iowa legislator acknowledged that she had this condition. I'm not blaming the lack of this legislation for her I'm not blaming it, but she certainly didn't have that option and we'll never know. Legal pharma drugs didn't help her. She gave up alcohol addiction, and that didn't help her, and she died a year later on the first day of spring. For me, I deserve and need this option, as do other veterans like me, to give my brain a break from this marathon, and I've had to work really hard with the VA to train myself to be at, like right now, I'm going 300 miles an hour, but you can't see that, and I'm really good at not being vulnerable on the outside, because I want to go buy groceries, or I want to go, be a productive citizen doing something of volunteering. I'm a little nervous, I'm sorry. And it killed my friend, and the VA has done for me all that they can do. As I have tried to do all that I can do. I had one counselor, doctor, tell me that I was going to burn out like a Vietnam veteran if I kept doing it, and she's like, "You're addicted to productivity." Okay, I'm sorry, sir. Do you have a question?
No, your time is up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is there anyone we've missed that came in late or didn't sign the sheet? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your information and opinion. We appreciate you sharing that with us today. Item 5 on the board are petitions to add qualifying conditions. Sarah Leaseter, Deputy Director of the Iowa Department of Public Health, is here today to lead our discussion and consideration of each of the petitions listed on today's agenda.
Okay.
Sarah?
Thanks, Catherine and colleague. Just for anybody who is new in the audience, the way that we proceed as it relates to these petitions is that the petitioner, if they're in the audience, will be offered 5 minutes to come up and present to the board about the contents of their petition. The board will have an opportunity to ask any questions that they have of the petitioner, and then the board will have deliberation and discussion, and they'll take a vote on how they want to resolve the petition that's in front of them. So the first petition that's on the agenda today is PTSD. I see Rebecca's here. Would you like to address the board, Rebecca, related to the PTSD petition?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the people who came out, the people who spoke, all the people that sent letters that I forwarded on as well. It's hard sometimes to be brave and to be able to talk about things that make you feel vulnerable, and I just appreciate you all so much. So, we'll get into the petition. We talked about it a little bit last time, all of the articles that were pulled. I wanted to go over a little bit that Minnesota study again. So Minnesota is one of the states that has approved PTSD for use in their medical cannabis program. I know that the discussion last time was the survey rates weren't very good, and of course people who got relief would be enthusiastic about talking about it, so nothing was proved by that. But I wanted to go into that study in a little bit more detail. Minnesota does a great job tracking their patients. This particular study looked at PTSD patients 6 months after enrollment in the medical cannabis program, and this survey that they took after this had over 50% response rate, which anyone who works in public health knows is a pretty good rate. When they talked to these patients, they actually used a PCL-5 score, which is equivalent to the DSM-5 score. It's the gold standard for PTSD diagnosis. And when they looked at these patients, over 71% had at least a 10-point decrease in their PTSD scores, according to the PCL-5. Does that prove anything? But does it heavily suggest that with access to medical cannabis, we could do good in our communities? Since we delayed this decision from August to now, over 2,000 veterans have committed suicide. Now, am I saying that this will help everyone? Absolutely not. But will it help 1,000? Will it help 100? Will it help one person? Even helping one person makes it worth it. So why wouldn't we? I also heard in the public comment that we're negating due process by bringing up conditions that have already been talked about. And I think that that's what we should be doing. Everyone here has a person that they know that is affected by PTSD or could be helped by this. And so the desire to be passionately and emphatically pushing for this and improving the quality of life of Iowans is something I think won't go away. I would again like to petition you to approve PTSD as one of the conditions that are approved in the state of Iowa for medical cannabis use. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Board members, do you have any questions for Rebecca at this time?
But I just want you to know this stack of papers here is all about PTSD.
Fantastic.
Unfortunately, they don't support this stuff.
So there's information both ways. Here, I'll set my things down. So, right, with every medication for any condition, you're going to have some people that it works for, some people that it doesn't. You may even have side effects that are detrimental to some people. And that's with any pharmaceutical. You'll see in the petition that I talked about the conventional therapies as well, and some of those side effects. So you see in antipsychotics an increase in suicidal ideation. Some of these side effects that we would say, yeah, this is not good. But we would also say, yeah, this does help some people. So while I understand, just like I said before, that this isn't something that will help all people, and I would say that it would be contraindicated, in fact, for some, I do believe the literature would suggest that there are people it can help. And we see that from state survey data, we see that from physicians in other states, and we see that in just other states after they've had a medical cannabis program for this specific condition.
Any other questions or comments specifically for Rebecca at this time? Okay. Board members, I know that the other thing that's happened since our August meeting is there's been a subcommittee of board members that have been assigned to go through the petitions that have been received, in addition to reviewing the medical literature that's been cited in those petitions, to also do the board's own review of medical literature that might be available. The subcommittee that was tasked with PTSD as well as the other conditions that are on the agenda for approval today consisted of Dr. Streck, Dr. Leesfeld, and Dr. Richards. I'm wondering if Dr. Richards or Dr. Leesfeld would like to take an opportunity to summarize for the rest of the board members kind of the work of the subcommittee. I know there was a meeting prior to this held this morning as well where additional public comment was received on the PTSD petition. And so I'm wondering if either of you at this point in time would like to kind of summarize or review kind of the results of your findings after your in-depth review.
I can start. So our task was to review the medical literature on the use of cannabis in PTSD. We did a thorough PubMed search, and Dr. Schreck sent us a very large stack of literature to review. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of randomized controlled trials out there regarding the use of cannabis in PTSD, and based on the thorough literature review that we did as far as medical scientific evidence, there just isn't, unfortunately, a lot out there. There are a couple of good studies underway, and we were hoping that the results of one of those studies would have been available by today's meeting, but unfortunately the results aren't out yet. So based on the review of our literature, we would, based on a medical scientific review of the literature, we would not recommend that this condition be approved.
Okay.
I would speak up to say this is probably one of the most difficult things we dealt with. Because our problem is, it's not that it might not work, it's nobody knows the safety profile. It just isn't there. It could be cause harm. And everybody, these authors again and again tell us, we don't know. We don't know. So you say, how do I deal with the potential of doing harm when I'm trying to do good? And it's a real tough question to come up with the answer for that. As she said, I wish these other studies were available to us right now, so that we could maybe come up with a different opinion about where we are scientifically. And I appreciate the emotion, because it's very emotional. And as I said before to this gentleman, I had 22 years in the Air Force Air National Guard. My last 3 years as the state air surgeon. But my job was to take care of the health care needs of all of the Guard people in the state of Iowa. And I can assure you PTSD from the people coming back was a big item and how we dealt with it. Now, we're stuck because the federal government didn't want to let the United States military use marijuana. I mean, it just didn't going to happen because it's a Schedule I. But at the same time, you always wondered, could it help somebody? We just don't know. We don't have a good answer. What we're looking for and desiring to have is a decent study. Now, first and foremost, if you ask me to approve CBD oil manufactured here in Iowa as a treatment program to be tried for PTSD, I'd pass it in a minute. Because the CBD component does not present me with any risk factors that we can see, none. I mean, the federal government has now approved a drug for seizure disorder that's pure CBD, and they approved it by a 13-0 vote in the FDA panel that said do it. Our problem continues to lie in this bitter fight over THC. How much is enough? What's right? The number we have proposed at 4.5, and I agree, get rid of the 3%, we said that we proposed at 4.5 is based on what is considered a safe level at this point as far as we know for THC. We don't know about 25. We really don't. I would love to see John's data, okay, that tells us that that's the number to get up to. And I push for a pharmacist in there. I really want a feedback at the dispensary level of whether we're helping or not helping. So if we could have all that from the legislature, I think this could be passed right now. I'm not speaking for the board as a whole, I'm speaking for myself. I voted against it scientifically because I don't have that power right now. But I would encourage the legislators sitting here, can you give us that kind of power? Can you put in play the ability to provide this to these people? But we know we're giving them a safe compound. We know we're not going to potentially cause harm, for sure. And then over time, if the studies say we need to change the THC, do something different with it, then we can do that. But right now, we don't have that. None of these say it. they all say we don't. And it's really hard when you first day of medical school, they teach you first do no harm. To say, what do I do? Do I just run this helter-skelter? Because that's what's tending to happen right now. Because we all know we wish the FDA would take this over and turn this into a real medicine. It's not being handled that way right now. So at this point, the only reason I'm not supporting it is because I don't have control over that THC level. Help us.
Okay, Dr. Richards, is there anything else you wanted to add at this point? Okay. Members of the board, do you have, I think we've heard that the subcommittee has considered the petition and their recommendation is to not approve the petition for PTSD. Do board members have any additional questions for our subcommittee members?
I think just for the record, when they reviewed the studies, even the ones that were entered in support of adding some of these conditions as qualifying conditions, just for the record, is it accurate that the researchers that did those studies said further research was needed to confirm the results of the small sample studies that supported the use of?
Yes, that is accurate. You know, the vast majority of the research articles, the conclusions were that further research is needed before we could safely recommend the use of cannabidiol or cannabis in the treatment of PTSD.
And so for the audience's just input, that's some of the things we struggle with are the small sample sizes or the lack of replication, even when those researchers conclude that further research is needed to confirm their own studies. So, and that came up periodically throughout several of the research articles submitted by different researchers.
Okay. Any other questions or clarifications or discussion that you guys would like to have at this particular time?
Have some general discussion.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank the subcommittee on their work wading through the mountain of literature and assessing the quality of it. And I agree on the limitations in the quality. But if we adhere to a strict requirement of strong evidence-based medicine, I don't see any need in anybody coming any longer, because we're not going to have it for several more years for any of the proposed indications. What I think our role as a board is to determine two things. Is it safe and is it reasonable? So I think we've heard ample testimony that it's reasonable to consider it as an indication. And in terms of safety, our jobs as physicians is constantly to weigh the risks of treatments with our patients. I would say that it would be naive to assume that there's no risks to the CBD products. In addition to my role serving on this advisory board, I serve as my county's chief medical examiner. And for years, I've gone to the scenes of suicides. Many, but not all, are related to PTSD, people who've lost the battle with PTSD in their own lives. And it ceases to amaze me as a physician in a small community, both the prevalence of PTSD, but also the number of those who commit suicide because of, again, the lost battle with their personal demons. I had the misfortune, and I've shared this before, of serving as both medical examiner and a pallbearer to my best childhood friend who lost his life as a veteran returning from Afghanistan when he no longer could fight the demons. So a number of us treat PTSD, psychiatrists, family physicians, pediatricians, and we can give ample testimony of the PTSD patients for whom standard medical therapy and counseling have worked tremendously. But I can also tell the stories of those who went through a number of psychiatrists, that went through a number of counselors and haven't gotten the help that they've needed. And this might be that missing treatment for those patients. And again, there are risks to the CBD, and the reports discuss that. Now, the risks of untreated PTSD are numerous as well. At the very least, they live a miserable existence. At the very worst, they die. So given the grave consequences of untreated PTSD, and in keeping with the spirit of the Right to Try legislation signed by Governor Branstad, I think in 2017, I'm going to put my support for this.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miller. Other discussion?
No, I think as much as I'm going to put my faith in the state legislature, do the right thing. Pass the bill that's going to fix this, and I'm going to take a chance with you. Because I believe he's right, okay, in what he says. We got a problem that needs fixing. Do we have the right answer? Nobody knows. And he's right. The studies aren't going to be around here for a long, long time. So because this has become a state issue and not a federal issue, John, do the right thing. Be careful with the amount of THC you're asking for, because that's the one we don't know. And that's kind of what killed that last bill, was just that number. Otherwise, it would have gone through. So as you get to your next session, we're going to give you the opportunity. I'm going to vote for it. I'm going to give you the opportunity to do the right thing at the state level, because you're acting on the behalf of the Food and Drug Administration to treat patients. Use your scientific mind. Make sure your data's good. Leave that THC content alone. Put it at 4.5 grams and let it go.
Okay, other board members, any additional discussion on the petition? Does everybody feel like you've had an opportunity to thoroughly review the petition and all of the information that's been submitted to supplement the petition? Okay, hearing no additional discussion at this point in time, I'd be looking for a motion.
I move to approve PTSD as a covered indication.
I'm going to second it.
Okay, is there any further discussion from the board?
I would just like to point out that there are 2 randomized controlled studies that are underway and that may be reviewed at the links that we have on our sheets here. And until those studies come out, VA and the World Health Organization have both advised against the use of cannabis for PTSD. So, you know, there may be good things, there may be bad things with PTSD, with the use of PTSD, but I just want to point that out.
And if strong evidence comes out that it's not beneficial or dangerous, we always have the power to remove a covered indication as well.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I would agree with Steve. I mean, the main concern I have is that, you know, I've seen many patients who, with marijuana, their symptoms have worsened, but they have probably the high THC levels. I would be much more comfortable knowing that patients who are trying these products aren't going to have their symptoms worsen with the THC content in the product. So I would agree with Steve that it's worthwhile to try, with the understanding that patients aren't going to have access to the product with high THC levels.
Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call vote now. When I announce your name, if you vote yes, you are voting to approve the condition. If you vote no, you are recommending denial. Dr. Cheney?
Yes.
Dr. Leesfeld?
Yes.
Dr. Miller?
Yes.
Dr. Richards?
Yes.
Dr. Stoken?
No.
Myself is no.
Okay, so the recommendation recommendation to add PTSD as a condition for which the use of medical cannabidiol is medically beneficial will be forwarded to the Board of Medicine next. Procedurally, for those of you in the audience who are not familiar, procedurally what happens with these petitions is that they're considered first by the Medical Cannabidiol Board here at these meetings. Their recommendations result in an order which is forwarded to the Iowa Board of Medicine. Then the Iowa Board of Medicine considers the order or the recommendation of this board at one of their public meetings. And if added, then the condition is added by the Board of Medicine by their administrative rule. So this board's recommendation is the first step in getting the condition added, and really ultimately it'll depend on what the Board of Medicine decides to do when it hits their desk. So that'll come next. And with that, the next petition on the list is intellectual disability with aggression or self-injury, and I do think we have a PowerPoint presentation, and the petitioners are present with us today.
There's a pointer for you.
Okay, great.
Sure. Yeah.
Anytime you'd like, did you get the pointer?
Yes, got the pointer. My name is Mary Roberts. This is Ann Brownsberger. We're co-founders of an organization called the Village Community. As I mentioned earlier, we're a 501c3 organization based out of Johnson County. We're also parents of young adults with pretty significant intellectual disabilities. So we both personally and professionally have a vested interest in this population. Oh, and where do I click it?
It shouldn't, it's not going.
No.
Try it now. Is it on?
There we go. Okay. I've given you each copies, just again, no one likes having PowerPoints read to them. But just the highlighted parts, this is the population that we're talking about. According to DSM-5, deficits in intellectual functioning and adaptive functioning and onset since childhood. So this is not including those with potential intellectual disability due to brain injury or accident. 40% of individuals with ID engage in self-injurious behavior. Again, this is something that I'm not going to read to you. You have the information in front of you. Often self-injury, I don't know if you can see all of it, but can be quite comprehensive.
Do you want me to adjust this real quick for you, Mary?
It's up to you. They have it in front of them too, so
I'll
that's
just do
easier and
this.
saves time. But like I said, it can be really comprehensive. In my own children, we've dealt with broken bones, we've dealt with sepsis from picking from infections. I know that's been the case with your daughter as well. Quite a few of the individuals we work with in our organization engage in significant self-injurious behavior.
It'll pop up.
Okay.
Sometimes.
So we had listed out there not only the types of self-injury that we see in our organization and in our own families and homes, but also kind of what the risks of those injuries could be. Infections, fractures, as I've mentioned, we've dealt with those ourselves. eye or dental trauma. I'm familiar with a young man who had eye surgery and literally gouged his eyes out. He's blind for life as a result of this. I mean, these folks can do some pretty horrific things to their bodies. It's really disconcerting to see, and if it's not something you're familiar with, it's something that we live with, and as I had mentioned, we work with these people on a daily basis, and it really takes a lot, unfortunately, often pharmaceutically, to keep these things in check. And some of the consequences, ER visits, hospitalizations, lots of restrictive interventions, restraints, social isolation, high caregiver stress. Speaking of PTSD, there's quite a few of us as parents who have that diagnosis because we deal with these type of issues with our own children. And being an autism parent, I often find that visuals are more effective than text or us talking. These are just some examples of self-injury within our own organization that we see. None of these are atypical. These go from biting to abrasions to scratches, self-biting. It can really be pretty extensive, and these are just a selection of ones we picked because we were able to crop out faces, but just again to show they're doing significant tissue damage to themselves. Aggression is also pretty common with this population. We didn't go into this a lot because I wanted to leave time for questions. But typically people with ID who engage in aggressive behavior, it persists over time, and over time they also get bigger and stronger. So the complications multiply from that. A lot of aggression, the way it manifests is similar to self-injury. It's just not to themselves, it's to others. This often leads to high turnover of staff, parent burnout. Most importantly, our goals in having this population have access to this medication to reduce incidences, obviously, of aggression and self-injury, reduce polypharmacy. My children are both on the program because they have an autism diagnosis. My son he also has a seizure disorder. He was on just a very toxic cocktail of pharmaceuticals, benzos, antipsychotics, SSRIs, high doses of all at the same time. He is now on nothing. He is only taking, through the state program, CBD, and maintaining, not just with his seizures, but his behaviors. The self-injury has gone down significantly. My daughter's newer to the program since she does not have a seizure disorder, but already we've been able to limit quite a bit of polypharmacy with her just by using the state program. Again, there's a lot of dangerous side effects. I don't need to tell any of you this, especially with psychotropic medications. And a lot of times that's what these folks, that's what we have to work with. Reducing hospitalizations due to behavioral escalations. We often at the hospital have patients that are literally dumped, and just having more tools and clinicians' toolkits to help stabilize these folks and get them back out in the community in a safe way. Reducing caregiver stress and burnout, and then again, having more options so that they're able to live in the community in the least restrictive environment. We kind of wanted to end, this is my daughter, the height difference you can see in the pictures. My daughter on the left, and Allie is Annie's daughter on the right. They both present similarly. They both are very, very aggressive. It's surprising looking at Allie, she looks like such a sweet little thing. Myself and one of our other staff, I'm, as you can see, not a small, petite person. I could not move Allie from point A to point B. Yes, go ahead. Oh, time, sorry, okay. Anyway, just if I can wrap up really quickly and say, they present very similarly in their behaviors. My daughter has access to this program because she has an autism diagnosis, where Allie does not. And so there seems to be an inequity in this for this population. So, sorry, I didn't realize I had talked that long already. Are there any questions we can answer?
Now, is your village program, does it receive federal funding?
Yes. We are a Medicaid provider.
Right, so in fact, you can't dispense the product to them, is that correct?
Well, most of the individuals in our program live in their family home.
Okay, so they, once again though, you would be restricted.
That is an
by
access
the federal
issue.
Funding,
Yes.
okay, that we have no control over
Exactly.
whatsoever,
Yes.
right? That you couldn't use it there at the facility. You
Correct,
have
it
to
would-
dispense outside of it.
Yes.
Again, we have no ability to change
Exactly.
federal law.
Right, right, which I know complicates your job. We understand that very much so, but I really just hope that you keep in mind when making this determination that the medications that we have at our disposal right now are really, have complicated side effect profiles, many of which are quite harmful. And to me, it's always a matter of balancing efficacy with safety, and with a lot of these medications, you know, you have safety down, or it doesn't balance out, you know, the risk of safety is up here and efficacy might be down here, and barely maintaining stability. And again, this may not work for everybody, but we would certainly like to have it as a tool to add as an option, so. But yes, you are correct, that's, we understand federal scheduling complicates access issues.
And at the dispensary level, there's no private, you gotta pay for yourself, right?
Correct.
I mean, there's no state, there's no,
Yes,
no
there is.
insurance company money,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
no federal money from Medicaid coming to buy the product at our dispensary.
Correct. There is a program called Children at Home that is available statewide for families with children with special needs that has now, I don't know if there's anyone from Braintree, but basically.
I have the applications over here.
You do, okay, that basically they are now allowing through the state program reimbursement for families. Am I, Erin,
That's
stating
correct. They
that
have,
correctly?
they have a part of their funding set aside to help families pay for their cannabidiol. for
Because
pediatric
again,
patients.
that's a recognized issue, that it's expensive and a lot of these folks are low income, so,
Yeah, that's, I know.
yeah.
I took 40 years of it, I understand what goes on.
Yep. Any other questions or anything we can clarify? All right, thank you for your time and again for your service on the board, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, board members, so again, with this petition, the subcommittee took a look at the petition. I'm wondering if Dr. Ziesveld or Richards would like to
I'm
talk
the one,
about-
I'm the one who wrote the opinion, so I'll be the one who speaks.
Okay.
The recommendation of the subcommittee is back to this whole issue of safety profile, the studies, and what's there and what's not there. We hashed this out enough. This was a very well-written and compelling petition. It had several very good letters of recommendation, including one from a medical provider, I can't use the name, that had obtained additional education on this therapy. The provider cited several individuals that were involved in research studies on this therapy, but did state this research was in its infancy. This particular petition had a lot of similarities to our previous decision to autism with aggression as a covered entity. Unfortunately, in researching your petition, I came across an article from Autism Open Access written by Adams et al. It's dated 9/2/2019. The title is Rating of the Safety and Efficacy of Marijuana, THC/CBD and CBD for Autism Spectrum Disorder. Results of 2 national surveys. And unfortunately, we're right back to square one. They concluded that although the results were promising, more research was needed to confirm these preliminary results. Basically, this report said that what we passed before for autism, the study says we weren't supposed to do it based upon safety profile. Our subcommittee is making no recommendation that we rescind what we passed before. And we voted against it, but we leave it to the board to decide whether we do something different again or not. Because you have got a big problem. You're a lot like PTSD. I've taken care of these patients. I know your dilemma, and I know the problems that we don't have good therapy. And I hope we have good therapy. And I think as long as I've said before, the state will give me a pharmacist in the dispensary, and the state will watch that THC level closely. Stop that game, because there's the danger. I'm be concerned about your patients getting higher levels of THC, about what it might actually do. So that was our position. I strongly encourage your group, your person who knows so much about these studies, get your patients in, okay, if you can, so they can add to our armamentarium. But again, I'm kind of like Lonnie. We're right back to this square one, okay? We don't have much. maybe what we got is what we ought to try and take our chances.
Okay. So, other members of the board have questions for Dr. Richards or Dr. Liesel, who are part of the subcommittee that kind of.
And, you know, once again, I'm a child psychiatrist. I voted for the autism petition with reservation, and I lost some sleep over that. And this petition is very similar to that. There's not a lot of medical literature supporting it, but, you know, based on, you know, the idea that it could be helpful, and I've seen many children and caregivers that have had significant problems with kids with self-injurious behaviors. I will vote in support of it, even in with the lack of medical evidence.
And I will share a research study with the N of 1. For the layperson, I mean just one person was in my research study. I certified a young patient of mine with severe autism with self-injurious and aggressive behavior shortly after we were able to do so. And I've been given permission by the patient's mother to discuss as needed. I'm wearing long sleeve shirts, otherwise you'd see the goosebumps. Every time I share this patient's success, I get goosebumps. To see the night and day change in her behavior, she went from a nonverbal, aggressive child. She can now recite her letters in English and Spanish. Her behavior better than my own children. So really I see the intellectual disability with aggression and or self-injury as the other side of the same coin. So I agree with Dr. Richards. You know, we don't have the evidence-based to support it, but again, it goes back to, is it reasonable? Is it safe? And I think in this situation, as with autism, we have the advantage of knowing that the patient's not taking it for euphoria. It's being given by a family member or caregiver. And if it doesn't work, they're not going to get a refill.
It's one good thing about this population, placebo effect is not really a thing
Right.
with them,
Right.
you know?
That's exactly
Yeah,
why we.
it either works or it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right, you're absolutely right.
Okay, any other discussion that you guys want to have or questions, either of the petitioners or the subcommittee members that you have about this particular petition? If you have no further discussion, I'll turn it back over to Captain McCallum for a vote.
First, I'll entertain a motion to add intellectual disability as a qualifying condition. Do we have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Do we want to give the full definition? Because the
Yes.
captain just said
Yep.
intellectual disability.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
intellectual disability with aggression and or self-injurious behavior.
Yep.
Is that the motion?
Yes,
Yes.
the official.
I second.
Okay, so we'll do the same roll call vote. If you vote yes, you are voting to add. If you vote no, you're voting to deny. Dr. Cheney,
Yes.
Dr. Liesfeld,
Yes.
Dr. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Richards,
Yes.
Dr. Stoken,
Yeah. Excuse me, yes.
myself, no.
Okay. As with the PTSD petition, we'll draft an order and get that down to the Board of Medicine for their consideration as the next procedural step as it relates to that particular petition.
And Sarah, to be fair, to
Yes.
tell you that they don't have to accept our recommendation,
yes.
okay?
Yep.
We don't have that kind of power, that if we get there, they say yes to everything we put up. As a matter of fact, they just turn us down on one.
Okay. Okay. So the next, are we ready to move on to the next one? Okay. So the next petition on our agenda to add a qualifying condition is for opioid dependency tolerance and use disorder. And it looks like Rebecca's getting up for public comment on this one? Petitioner comment, I should say.
All right, thanks everyone for having me up again. This one is a little bit more difficult maybe to explain, so I thought I would make a few slides. And the purpose of this is, you guys have all read the petition, but I thought, let's look at some other states' medical boards, kind of what criteria are they looking at for approving or disapproving conditions, and then where does opioid use disorder fit into those criteria? So the purpose of this is obviously to add opioid use disorder tolerance to the list of Iowa approved conditions. Potential benefits would be reducing those symptoms of withdrawal. As we know, opioid or MAT treatment can include another opioid or an opioid antagonist. Those antagonists can really increase the onset of those withdrawal symptoms, such as nausea, insomnia, changes in appetite, things like that. Then allow for tapering of opioids. This is something that we've seen at our dispensaries so far, either tapering, lowering of doses, or complete getting off of things like fentanyl patches. Help in retention of patients in those kinds of MAT treatment programs, decrease in likelihood of relapse, and then that would be due to the analgesic properties. So if you're taking away an opioid, you're not necessarily taking away pain, so providing a secondary analgesic. So I wanted to look at the New Jersey review process. They have a medical board that consists of 7 persons, both MDs and pharmacists. They work on a consistent and set criteria of pass-fail for each condition, and they did grant opioid use disorder. So what we'll do is go through the criteria by which they judge, and then where did opioid use disorder fit in those criteria. So here are the requirements for addition. One is that the condition is a real medical condition as accepted by the medical community. The second is, does the condition cause severe suffering? The third is, are there accepted treatments for the condition and do they cause suffering? The fourth is, are there any treatments that are accepted that do not cause suffering? And then, is there any evidence to support a potential use for cannabis to alleviate suffering? So the first and second, this condition, opioid use disorder, is a generally accepted condition. It's valid within the CDC and the U.S. Department of Health. Can the condition cause suffering? Just to quote their words, opioid use disorder itself, as well as its treatments for this condition, cause severe suffering for patients. I think we kind of all know the troubles that opioids have brought to our state and the nation as a whole. The second two, do medically accepted treatments cause suffering? So the medical director and the board decided that MAT therapy is the gold standard for opioid use disorder or tolerance. And side effects include insomnia, body aches, vomiting, just like everything. We talked about everything has a side effect profile. And they concluded that MAT medications can cause a patient suffering. So then we move to the next step, which is, are there conventional treatments that do not cause suffering? They restated that MAT therapies are the most effective and viable conventional treatment, and as such, I find there is an absence of effective medical therapies that cause patients to suffer. The fifth, is there evidence that support a potential use for cannabis alleviating symptoms? I put a couple of quotes from their medical director in here. I can read them. One says, I find that there is sufficient evidence that the use may relieve the suffering related to opioid use disorder. The second, the use of medical cannabis in conjunction with MAT has the potential to ease opioid withdrawal symptoms, reduce opioid consumption, ameliorate opioid cravings, prevent opioid release, improve OUD treatment retention, and reduce overdose deaths. So basically what I've said in the petition as well. And then the citizens of New Jersey suffering from this horrible disorder simply cannot wait for the removal of the political barriers that are preventing research on this promising treatment in order to receive a medication that may ultimately save their lives. The New Jersey petition was submitted with support from the medical professionals, and they said that based upon that analysis, medical marijuana is more likely than not to be potentially beneficial to treat or alleviate the debilitating effect of condition. So opioid condition was added as a standalone condition by the medical board in New Jersey. So with that, I would re-ask that you consider adding opioid use disorder, opioid tolerance to the approved list of conditions in Iowa. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Board members, any questions for Rebecca about her presentation or about the petition? All right. Thank you. Subcommittee members, Drs. Richards and Leesfeld. did you want to provide any comments to the rest of the board about your findings as you looked at the literature that would accompany the petition, as well as anything else that you were able to find?
Yeah, I can address this. We, once again did a very thorough PubMed search. There really hasn't been any new convincing literature since we denied this petition back in August. The three of us did thoroughly review the 72 references cited by the petitioner. A lot of the references were animal studies, and the majority of the references actually don't address the treatment of opioid use disorder. Most of the national organizations, such as the American Society of Addiction Medicine, National Institute on Drug Abuse, endorse further research before the claim can be made that cannabis is an effective treatment for opioid use disorder. As an addiction psychiatrist, the concern that I would have is that we would be sending a public health message that medical marijuana maybe is an alternative or replacing MAT treatment, and that's what I would be worried about. MAT treatment is an evidence-based treatment for opioid use disorder. So I think if people were maybe using medical marijuana instead of the evidence-based MAT treatment, it could potentially be harmful. So based on the, once again, based on the medical literature, the subcommittee would recommend denying the petition.
Board members, any questions for members of the subcommittee about their review?
I just have one, I don't know if you can answer. So MAT treatment, does that officially wean them off of opiates for good? Or how does that work?
So generally, MAT treatment consists of methadone, Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, and naloxone combination, and naltrexone is also considered to be a MAT treatment. Some patients will continue on MAT treatment indefinitely and perhaps even throughout their lifetime. So it's, except for naltrexone, methadone and buprenorphine are more of a substitution treatment for the opioids. They control cravings and any withdrawal symptoms.
And that, some of the concerns you shared were some I had, like we're trading one addiction for another, but then some of the studies too, it was almost like a lower dose maybe of opiates maintenance, but then you're adding cannabis as a maintenance drug too, and just how long-term that was, again, was my question for this.
I noticed in the New Jersey Medical Board, they have said medical marijuana in conjunction with MAT, but then they approved just, was that the way it was approved?
Yeah, so it was approved as a standalone. They only suggested that, especially in conjunction with MAT therapy, which we know has 20% or less retention rate, you could improve those retention rates and probably improve that tapering further.
Board members, any other discussion or questions for members of the subcommittee, or just further discussion, general observations that you have?
And serving on the subcommittee and this information, we felt this was different than the PTSD and the intellectual disabilities because there just aren't any good therapies. Whereas in opioid use disorder, there is some proven therapies. And until, this is a situation where you really do need the safety studies before you say it's good to move forward, and it doesn't exist. There is alternatives. There is other ways to treat it. And that have been shown to be effective and so far with a pretty good safety profile. So this is a lot different than the other two as far as no studies.
So I would entertain a motion to add opioid dependency, tolerance, and use disorder as a qualifying condition related to this petition. Do we have a motion and or a second?
Well, I'll move it.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
For the sake of a vote, I second.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, so same as before, we'll do the roll call vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to add opioid dependency, tolerance, and use disorder as a qualified condition. No, you're denying that request. Dr. Cheney?
No.
Dr. Leesfeld?
No.
Dr. Miller?
No.
Dr. Richards?
No.
Dr. Stoken?
No.
Myself is no.
Okay, so the final petition to add a qualifying condition that's on your agenda for consideration today is the petition to add Alzheimer's disease. Is the petitioner here that would like to address the board related to Alzheimer's disease as well?
I can.
Okay.
So I did not put the petition together. Actually, Caitlin Anderson, who is the pharmacy technician that works at the dispensary, put it together. It is a replica of exactly what was submitted to Minnesota and was approved by Minnesota. So she would be more educated than I am speaking about it. But I believe some of the main symptomology would be some of that helping with neurotoxicity, helping with inflammation, and then also a decrease in some of those agitation behaviors that are commonly associated with the dementia piece of Alzheimer's. So the condition or the petition is well written. I think it talks about nearly everything. Of course, there is some in vitro research about the direct effect on the beta amyloid plaques, but I think for the purpose of this conversation, it would be more about the decrease in agitation due to Alzheimer's and that anti-inflammatory effect as well.
Okay, board members, questions for Rebecca about the Alzheimer's petition? Okay. I'm not sure who was assigned this one. Dr. Richards, you want to provide comments on behalf of the subcommittee?
The subcommittee, on a 3-0 vote, recommended denial. This is our rationale. This petition relied primarily on the report from the Minnesota board that approved this diagnosis in Minnesota in 2018. This report did cite the 4 current FDA-approved medications for Alzheimer's. These mechanism of action for these agents is primarily the effect on acetylcholinesterase to raise acetylcholine levels, which has an effect on amyloid plaque development. This report cited some evidence that cannabis products have a similar effect on that acetylcholinesterase. To date, this current approved drug therapy has shown some ability to slow disease progression. It doesn't stop it. This is leading to a total shift in theories about the actual cause of Alzheimer's disease, including the possibility that it's due to a viral infection, which is causing research to change a totally different direction, away from the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. But this stuff is really, truly in its infancy. In its rationale, the Minnesota board cited 2 ongoing studies at the very end when they approved the condition. So when they approved it in 2018, they were citing 2 studies that weren't done. One was a trial of cannabidiol adjunctive therapy for agitation, the treatment of Alzheimer's. This is still an ongoing study, and there's no scheduled reporting until December of 2020. So whether it works for agitation, there's a study, it's not there first. The other study they cited was safety and efficacy of nabilone in Alzheimer's, with an expected reporting period in the spring of 2019. Well, is it out there? A current literature search, which was pretty easy to do, found the November 2019 issue, in other words, hot off the press, the Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry, volume 27, issue 111, pages 1161 through 1173, with the same title and authors as cited, came to the conclusion that although there appears to be some positive results, larger, longer studies are needed to confirm. So we're right back to the same place, and we're dealing with a huge population in the Alzheimer's. I don't think we're all ready to open up the total population of Alzheimer's to something that may or may not be good for them. And clearly, I couldn't vote for this until at least that another study about whether it does work for the agitation factor, which is a different issue, okay, in that big a population. I think you just can't take that chance. So that's why we voted not to approve.
Board members, you've heard the subcommittee's recommendation about this particular petition. Do you have questions for either Dr. Leesfeld or Dr. Richards about the subcommittee's work? related to the Alzheimer's petition.
I just have one question, kind of like the autism or the intellectual disability. What's the scale for Alzheimer's disease, and is that something that can be detected through like a genetic test? Are we talking pre-Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's, end stage Alzheimer's? What kind of nebulous are we talking about here with Alzheimer's, or how early can that be detected?
The actually only definitive diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is brain biopsy, which can't be done. So, quite honestly, there aren't any tests, even MRIs, CTs, that really can make the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. It's really based mostly on history. There are some other forms of dementia that do have some changes on MRIs and CTs, and that's not called Alzheimer's then. You get vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, but quite honestly, they act quite similar, and the treatments aren't very good. So the answer to your question is no. There's no good way to do it except like, hey, it showed up, and gee, grandma's starting to forget things. Now we start tracking it over time. Oh, and by the way, just for reference, this was the only material we could find on cannabis in Alzheimer's disease in our PubMed searches. There's not a whole lot out there.
Any other questions, or just for the subcommittee members, or just general observations that the board would like to make about this particular petition?
In general, I think this would be of little assistance. Most patients with Alzheimer's, especially those with behavioral issues, reside in long-term care facilities, dementia units, and they simply cannot dispense the product anyway. So it's not going to help many at all.
Any other observations or conversation before I turn it back over to Captain McKelvey for a vote? Okay.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to add Alzheimer's disease as a qualifying condition related to this petition. Do we have a first or a second?
So move.
Do we have a second?
Second. I'm sorry.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, so same thing, if you vote yes when I call your name, you're voting to approve. If you vote no, you're recommending denial. Dr. Cheney?
No.
Dr. Leesfeld?
No.
Dr. Miller?
No.
Dr. Richards?
No.
Dr. Stoken?
No.
Myself is no.
Okay. So this is scenario,
Yep.
petitions, I did not want to do this next petition.
Take on that.
I would be fine taking.
For the sake of everyone, let's do a 15-minute recess, and then we'll come back. So I've got 11:30, let's plan on being back here at 11:45.